Earlier this week, President Trump delivered his not a State of the Union address to Congress. It was one of the longest addresses ever delivered to a joint session of Congress. I am not going to comment on the entire thing here. I am going to focus on one particular, very brief section of the speech where Trump said this.
My administration is also working to protect our children from toxic ideologies in our schools. A few years ago, January Littlejohn and her husband discovered that their daughter's school had secretly, socially transitioned their 13-year-old little girl. Teachers and administrators conspired to deceive January and her husband while encouraging her daughter to use a new name and pronouns. They, them pronoun, actually, all without telling January, who is here tonight and is now a courageous advocate against this form of child abuse. January, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Stories like this are why, shortly after taking office, I signed an executive order banning public schools from indoctrinating our children with transgender ideology.
First of all, shame on January Littlejohn for taking part in this. Shame on Donald Trump for having her take part in this. And shame on every single person in that chamber who applauded for this. It's fucking atrocious. It's absolutely shameful to see a parent participating on national television in the bullying of her own trans child and in the bullying and the expansion of efforts to use the power of the state to bully and erase and persecute trans children like her child all over the country. It is absolutely shameful. But that's not exactly what this video is going to be about. I want to read to you from an article from, of all places, Reason Magazine. The headline of this article by Elizabeth Nolan Brown is, Trump's trans kid story doesn't add up. The president said a Florida school secretly socially transitioned a 13-year-old. Emails suggest otherwise. And before I read to you what I want to read to you from this article, I just want to give you a thought to hold on to for a few minutes. We'll come back to it. And that thought is this. Donald Trump just said in that piece of the speech that I played you that he has taken action through executive order to ban toxic, dangerous, quote-unquote, trans ideology from public schools. And he has done so on the basis of stories like these, meaning stories like the one he told about January Littlejohn and her trans child being supposedly secretly transitioned. If that was a real problem, if that was such a widespread problem, if quote-unquote trans ideology not only existed, but was such a problem, was such a serious threat to the children of America that the executive branch of the federal government, in the person of the President of the United States, was compelled to personally intervene to stop it. Don't you think Donald Trump or his speechwriters would be able to find a better example of this kind of thing than a story that I just described to you, courtesy of Reason Magazine, as a story that doesn't add up? Just hold that thought. Here's what the Reason article says. In Trump's telling, the school was both pushing gender nonconformity on the Littlejohn child and doing so without the parent's knowledge. But emails obtained by media outlets years ago suggest that not only did the parents know this was going on, it was they who first broached the subject with the school and suggested that staff follow their child's lead on name and pronouns. The reason that some outlets discovered this years ago is because last night's Trump speech wasn't the first time the Littlejohns have been used by politicians pushing an intolerant agenda. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis repeatedly pointed to the Littlejohn family to explain the need for a controversial new law dubbed by critics the Don't Say Gay bill that bans schools from teaching about sexual orientation or gender identity, CNN reported in April 2022. From a bit further down in the article, like Trump's story last night, DeSantis's tale suggested that the school was for some reason grooming this child to be transgender and doing so without any conversations with the parents. But emails obtained by the Tallahassee Democrat in response to a public records request and later obtained by CNN show that January Littlejohn wrote the school in 2020 to announce that her child wanted to use different pronouns and go by a gender-ambiguous nickname. This has been an incredibly difficult situation for our family, and her father and I are trying to be as supportive as we can. She is currently identifying as non-binary. January Littlejohn wrote to a teacher at her child's school in August 2020 per CNN. She would like to go by the new name, redacted, and prefers the pronouns they, them. We have not changed her name at home yet, but I told her if she wants to go by the name, redacted, with her teachers, I won't stop her. The teacher asked if this information should be shared with other teachers. Littlejohn reportedly responded, whatever you think is best, or, redacted, can handle it herself. In another email, Littlejohn told the teacher, I sincerely appreciate your support. I'm going to let her take the lead on this, according to CNN. These do not sound like the words of someone who was kept in the dark about her child's social transitioning at school, nor do these emails seem to suggest that the school was pushing unwanted, quote, gender ideology, unquote, on the child. So other than the misgendering of the child in the mother's emails, where she says the child wants to now be referred to using they, them pronouns, but then the mother continues to refer to the child as she, other than that, at this point in August 2020, it seems like a fairly good story, right? The parents seem like maybe they don't get it. They don't really understand what's going on, but they want to be supportive of the child. And the mother brings this to the attention of the school, not the other way around, and no keeping of anything secret. The parents know what's going on and are informing the school and are asking the school to be supportive of their child as their child explores their gender identity and might want to go by a different name or be referred to using gender-neutral pronouns. So far, so good. Now, at some point after this, the attitude of the Littlejohns, the parents, changes drastically. And instead of seeking to include the school in being supportive of their child's trans identity, they file a lawsuit against the school for what they claim was a secret gender non-conforming support plan that the school created and implemented for their child and didn't tell them about it. And that's what they sued over. Not that the school was socially transitioning the child and was keeping it from the parents, but that in enabling the child to socially transition in an effective and non-traumatic, non-disruptive way, they created a plan, and apparently the parents were not informed of this plan, or this plan was kept from the parents. And I just want to say, if the school did come up with a plan like this and it was kept from the parents, that was done at the request of the child. That was done because at some point before that, again, we know at some point the attitude of these parents changed, and they went from supporting their trans child to being negative toward their child's trans identity. So if the school came up with a support plan and then chose to not include the parents on that, to not bring the parents in on the loop, that's because the child asked them to. That's because the child, for some reason, had a fear or a concern that if their parents were brought in on this, that would be a negative thing. That would be a bad thing. So I personally cannot blame the school district for doing that, if that is indeed what happened. Cannot blame the school for doing that, because a school's number one priority is not keeping the parents happy. A school's number one priority is the welfare of the students. And a lot of parents seem to forget that. A lot of parents, like the Little Johns, seem to forget that. They seem to forget that the school's number one priority is their children, not them, and not keeping them happy, and certainly not assisting them in turning their children into whatever they think their children ought to be. The role of a teacher and a school is to support and educate and nourish and protect the children that are given to them, that are put into their care for several hours a day, and to take children as they find them, which is something that parents ought to do, by the way, as well, but to take their students as they find them and to support them and help them as much as they can, not to aid and abet bigoted parents in oppressing their children. Again, a lot of parents, especially a lot of parents like the transphobic Littlejohn family, or I don't know about the father, but at the very least, the transphobic Littlejohn mother, January Littlejohn, they seem to forget that. They think, because see, parents are on the ladder, right? Parents are on the ladder in terms of child care and interfacing with schools and the responsibilities that schools have to the public. Parents are on that ladder. They're just not the top step. A lot of parents think they should be the top step. They should come, and their interests and their desires should come above what's best for their children that are at the school. And that's not the way it goes, or at least that's not the way it should go. The students, the children who go to the school, they should be the top of the ladder. They should be the top priority. The parents are on the ladder, but they're not as high as the kids. But anyway, that's just me pontificating. The point is, if this was representative of such a serious, widespread problem, if trans ideology was such a serious problem and was being pushed on non-trans kids, on cis kids by schools for some reason, and if this was such a serious problem that the President of the United States had to intervene and do something about it, why is this the only example of that kind of thing that has been cited? And it's been cited now for 3 years. First by Ron DeSantis in 2022. It happened almost 5 years ago. It was cited by Ron DeSantis as an excuse for the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida in 2022, according to this article. And it was cited again just this past week by Donald Trump at his address to a joint session of Congress. Now, if this problem is so serious, how come the only example that these people can find is this one? And how comes this isn't even an example of what they're talking about? Because we know from the emails written by this child's mother that the school was not hiding the transition from them, that in fact it was the mother who brought the idea of assisting with the social transition initially before for some reason she changed her mind. That it was the mother who brought this to the school. The school was not keeping this from her. The school was not pushing this on the child. This was coming from the child and initially from the parents. So it is a dishonest example and an inaccurate example, a non-example, if you will, of the supposed threat of transing kids, of school districts and teachers grooming kids to be trans. And yet somehow we're supposed to believe that this is such a serious threat. We're supposed to believe, first of all, that people being trans, that children and teenagers coming out as trans is a threat to begin with, which it's not. Some people are trans. It's just the way some people are. I think if you have a problem with it, you should get over it and just learn to fucking live with it. But we're supposed to believe not only is that in and of itself a threat, but it's such a widespread threat that we all need to be worried about it, and it's appropriate for the federal government to be taking action against it. So where are the cases? Where are the cases? Where are the cases of this happening? And if there are so goddamn many of them, how come we keep hearing the same one over and over again? I'm waiting. I would love to hear more examples. I would love to hear a better example. Is there one actual example of the kind of thing that people are pretending this is? Is there one legitimate example of a student in a public school who is not trans and has not expressed any desire to come out as trans or to transition in any way, who was pressured into transitioning by their school or by their teacher? Is there a single example of that ever reported anywhere? I would love to hear it, because so far I have not heard it. I've heard a lot of people like Donald Trump and, sadly, unfortunately, January Littlejohn, the parent of a trans person, and Elon Musk, and a bunch of who is also the parent of a trans person, and a bunch of other shitty transphobic bigots and alarmists trying to spread fear and trying to start a moral panic about this. Talk about how terrible it is and how widespread it is and how we need to protect our children from it. I've heard them talk about it. I've not heard a single legitimate example of this ever happening. Nor have I heard an argument of, if it was happening, why should I regard it as a threat? Because what is the national emergency? If a teacher is pressuring a non-trans student to transition, and that's found to be actually what's happening, that a teacher is putting unwanted pressure on a student to transition when that student does not want that, has not expressed any desire for that, that seems like an easy fix. You just fire that fucking teacher. I don't see why the president needs to get involved. You just fire the teacher. Once you verify that that is what has happened, that that teacher has acted inappropriately, you just fire that fucking teacher. Why is it that the government needs to get involved? Sure seems like they're, like I said, just trying to start a moral panic, just trying to give us people to be afraid of and to scapegoat. Which is all moral panics are, which is all, that's what was done with people of color, with black people in the past. That's what's been done and is currently being done with immigrants and refugees. That's what has been done since forever with Jews. And now also with Palestinians, ironically enough. Cover all the bases. Cover all the bases. We're supposed to hate Jewish people and we're supposed to hate Palestinian people. Fuck them. Fuck them all. Gay people, trans people, queer people from across the spectrum. Scapegoats. That's all it is. There's not a single fact behind any of this. And if there is, again, if there is, please let me know. Inform me. And maybe also inform the people who are actually trying to push this, because they don't have any. There's no case here. There's no case here. If there was a case for this kind of thing, if there was a case that trans ideology, whatever the fuck that is, was such a threat and needed to be dealt with on a federal level, if there was a case for that, they would make it and they wouldn't have to fake it.